I'm the curator. Although I don't know, I'm always a little wary about that word. Really, I'm an organizer. Yeah. Lights Out Baltimore monitors downtown during migration, and it all has to do with the fact that a lot of birds are colliding with buildings. It's a crazy, horrible statistic. As many as 1 billion birds are dying each year just in the United States. So that's where this all started for me, in terms of like my personal involvement with birds. But this show has a slightly different take. In the past, I had really concentrated on just specifically the collision issue. But I guess the other part of this for me personally is that I'm a bird watcher, or rather a birder. It's like another level of obsession. And just over the years, I've lived in Baltimore for 14 years, and over the years, there are just fewer birds. Every year, there are fewer birds. So this show addresses that sense of loss, this absence. And that's where I kind of, came up with the title, Birdland, Baltimore in the Anthropocene, this age of where there isn't a single natural system that hasn't been, affected by human activity. I started working with Lights Out in 2009, and it built and it built and it built, and it got me to here. And this building is very special. In terms of its history. It was the first purpose-built museum in the United States. So there were painting exhibitions, but also displays of natural history here. So it seemed like a perfect fit.
Of course, I knew about the Peales and I knew about the Peale Museum, but I didn't realize it was in Baltimore. The Peales typically are associated with Philadelphia, which is where the patriarch Charles Willson Peale was based, and where most of the family grew up. Fortunately, that's what happens when an important building is more or less abandoned for 20 years. It fades from popular memory. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do now, is really open the doors and get as many people in here as possible, and also work out in the community so people start to realize that the Peale is actually a really important part of the cultural fabric of Baltimore.
My name is Jackson Gilman Forlini, and I'm the Historic Properties Program Coordinator for the City of Baltimore in the Department of General Services. And in that role, I ensure that stewardship and maintenance of city-owned historic landmarks is done to historic preservation standards. So the Peale Museum is one of the most historic buildings in Baltimore. It's been through so many different iterations, starting with the first museum building in the United States, followed by the first City Hall, the first public African-American high school, and then, of course, the Municipal Museum of Baltimore throughout the 20th century.
So here at the Peale, we're very interested in kind of continuing to operate in that spirit of innovating on cultural practice and what museums are and how they contribute to the local community. And so that's kind of how we ended up partnering with the Birdland and the Anthropocene exhibition. People are really interested in being participants these days. They don't want to just kind of sit in a chair or walk passively through a museum and kind of be told about stuff. They actually want to be somehow proactive in the creation of those narratives and in the sharing of them. So I think one of our challenges is to, as you say, figure out how to make the history, the architecture of Baltimore, and all of the relevant cultures meaningful to contemporary audiences. But if we kind of start with the premise that people are interested in participating in those stories and kind of use some of the new tools that have emerged with the internet and the past couple of decades, then I think we're starting with the audience and the relevance baked in.
Well, I think what's important for museums in general, and what we're going to be doing at the Peale Museum, is to be able to present those narratives in a way which get people to respond to them emotionally, but also think about them in an unexpected way.
Birdland was very much the same. The artists were using every single floor and nook and cranny of the building and the back garden. And so when you came here, it was sort of like stepping into the subject and the ideas and the issues that the artists were dealing with, rather than just watching them behind glass. Reimagining the Peale as a sort of a 21st century museum, I think part of that is not just thinking of it as the building or as the museum as a destination, but thinking about this as a kind of a launch pad to go out beyond the building throughout various communities in Baltimore and beyond.
It's really important knowing, how much trouble that thirds are in, that we reach out to kids, our future architects and builders and problem solvers, to make them aware of the problem. So that's why I've been doing workshops in schools with Make Studio even, the artists at Make Studio, adults with disabilities. This is also about making connections, this outreach. I think almost everybody has a third story, whether it's just like something funny you saw in your yard, or maybe a third pooped on you, or thirds are so prevalent. They permeate our culture. They're you can't look to any artistic medium without finding them and how much they've affected us. So I think everyone has something to say or contribute.
You have a capital mass of people that are getting together at the grassroots level in order to say, yes, this is a priority for our community, and therefore we need to do what it takes to get the funding to save this building. But there are a lot of historic buildings which aren't as well cared for, and we need to be doing just as good a job at making sure that as a community we're taking care of the parts of our past that we want to make sure are in our future. And sometimes it's easy to say, well, why is saving an old building a priority? Shouldn't we be tackling these other social issues first? And the answer is that the two, I think, are not necessarily separated. No problem that any city faces exists in a vacuum. And we are at a point in our history as a city where we're really starting to come to terms and really truly understand as a community many of the wrongs that happened in the past. And the only way that we're going to right them is by coming together and reconciling our present selves with our past selves.
The location is an important factor in terms of being on this block with real news, and now this wonderful new restaurant, Bee's Table, that modern soul food. This is Baltimore, and it's important to connect to all of its history. I've been trying to find ways to honor that. Certainly the piece by William Rhodes is probably the most important expression of that, the caged bird. Yeah.
We're encouraging people to rethink kind of what is a museum in the 21st century, Why do we need them? Why are they important to us? And maybe rediscover a new and more intense commitment to preserving our cultural heritage. I think if we can achieve that, then we will be a big part of catalyzing what I'll call the next American cultural renaissance. So in the 20th century, that started in Harlem. Why not have it be Baltimore in the 21st century?